My name is Andy Stoll. I'm a senior program officer at the Kauffman Foundation. This is my colleague, Philip Gaskin, also with the Kauffman Foundation. Who was in our session earlier? We had a part one, okay? And how many people were not in our session earlier? This is, okay, so we're gonna have to do a quick recap. For some of you who were here before, we actually, the 1 o'clock show, or the 4 o'clock show is different than the 1 o'clock show. We're gonna actually start off with a video, if the video works, and that is our fault if it doesn't. Just to remember, we're talking about entrepreneurial ecosystem building and how do you implement successful entrepreneurial ecosystem building initiatives. We don't have the steps or all the answers, but we have some thoughts. So let's see if this video will play. And if it does, we applause to Alex in back who's running the AV. So let's see if it works. Dun, dun, dun. Oh, there it goes.
An entrepreneurial ecosystem is all of the resources that surround entrepreneurs as they move their business forward. Ecosystem building is about getting those resources and folks in the community to work together by creating an environment of trust and collaboration, supporting big ideas, supporting people when they take risks, supporting people when they fail, creating that right culture that is ripe for entrepreneurial success. Because of the changing nature of our economy and our communities, we have to take new approaches in ways that will make sure that everyone has the opportunity to participate. Traditional ways of supporting entrepreneurs looked at the individual parts of an ecosystem. Ecosystem builders take a systems view. They put entrepreneurs front and center in that system and they say, how can I make our community more supportive of entrepreneurs of all types? So the role of an ecosystem builder is really a systems leader. It really takes leaders stepping up who care about the whole system and not just the individual parts of the ecosystem. Entrepreneurial ecosystem builders come from economic development, community development, libraries, universities. They come from different sectors. They could be entrepreneurs themselves. Anyone who cares about the success of entrepreneurs in their community. The challenge is that there's thousands of people that are working on building their entrepreneurial ecosystem, but they were doing it what I would call custom and bespoke ways. There's very little consensus on some basic elements. How do we create the environment in which entrepreneurs in our community can thrive? What are the processes? What are the steps? How do you build an ecosystem? How do you measure the health of an ecosystem? And I think as that practice of ecosystem building matures, it becomes more available to more communities. The only way we're going to figure out how to do this is to figure it out together.
So big shout out to Alex in back for making our video work. Our fault on the video, but thank you, Alex. Give him a round of applause. All right. Can you hear me in back? Is this good microphone-wise? All right. So someone's going to ask me later, how can I find that video? If you go into YouTube and you just type in, what is entrepreneurial ecosystem building, you will find that video on YouTube. Again, we're here talking about how to implement successful entrepreneurial ecosystems. And if you were here earlier, we sort of gave a 101 overview. And we're going to dive a little bit deeper into some of the work that we've been doing around a program called E-Ship Communities, which I'll have Philip present in a moment. But I just want to put the same precursor I put in the session earlier. We don't have all the answers. There's no answer room at the Kauffman Foundation. If you're looking for it, trust me, I work there. We work there. There's no answer room. But what we want to share is really some of the learnings through our work around building the profession and practice of entrepreneurial ecosystem building in the United States. And today we're going to walk through some of those learnings in one of our programs. So Philip, I'll turn it over to you to introduce the E-Ship Communities program.
Great, thanks, Andy. So that video ended by saying we have to figure this out together. And so that's one of the things that we want to do. We basically said, okay, that's a thesis. That's what we think ecosystem building is, but does it work? And so what we did was embarked on a program which is called E-Ship, for short for Entrepreneurship Communities, which is really a testing and validating of the thesis of ecosystem building. I'm using the 7 design principles that we talked about this morning in ecosystem building. And we did that across 4 cities. Right? Kansas City, our hometown, Central New Mexico, Baltimore, Maryland, and Long Beach, California. All for very, very different reasons, different geographies, what have you. If you look at Long Beach, California, it sits right in between LA and Orange County. It's still Los Angeles County, but close to Orange County. And it doesn't really pull off of either big county, but has this amazing, thriving ecosystem. Why? Entrepreneur, why? So that was the study. Baltimore, Maryland is one where you have real estate covenants in a city that's very, very divided racially on real estate that needs to come together from an entrepreneur's perspective. Kansas City divided also, but economically divided cities, and across a state line dividing Kansas City, Kansas, and Kansas City, Missouri. And then central New Mexico, which was taking the Los Alamos area, Santa Fe, New Mexico, and Albuquerque, and seeing how could 3 cities work together in a central part of the state with rural in between, and to see how an entrepreneurial ecosystem could form off of that. Common denominator was each of the 4 had to have an entrepreneur-friendly mayors that could advocate for this effort. When entrepreneurship-friendly mayors are not present, sometimes it can be challenging. So that's the where to go.
We're working through working through our next slide. So,
Got it. That one we should.
Next slide. Okay, we've heard these. Just go to the next slide there. We mentioned a little bit of E-ship communities, and then I think we should actually go to the next video. Actually, let me do the next slide and then the video. So the next slide will be, obviously you've met the 2 of us today. Does anyone know Faye Horwood at Forward Cities? A number of people? So Faye Horwood and our partnership with Forward Cities to help implement this program. Faye could not join us today, but I just want to say for those of you who know Faye, she's here in spirit on stage with us. Without Forward Cities, which is an organization based in Raleigh that specifically focuses on how to build equitable entrepreneurial ecosystems, this program would be possible, but through a partnership with Forward Cities, we were able to implement the program. We'll go to the next slide, Alex can, and we'll watch a video about the program, and then we'll talk a little bit about the model that's come out of it.
Go to the next click.
There's enough room for entrepreneurs, and this is the future. An entrepreneurial ecosystem builder is a community organizer for entrepreneurs.
Is a connector. Helps individuals, organizations, and community get connected.
It's about identifying where barriers exist, even unspoken barriers, where things have been just insurmountable, basically, for folks to access resources that do exist in our region.
It's someone who is willing to sit down and have a lot of individual conversations to understand what's happening and to connect and to put things together, right? Both within this individual level, right? Like an individual entrepreneurial level, but also what's happening at the system.
They really have a systems view of things. They're looking at the context to understand the systems that are keeping what's around in place. And so we're really trying to build a new system.
There are so many pockets of our city where entrepreneurial ideas are starting, but not all get the same recognition.
You have population centers, and then you have rural areas surrounding those centers. And if they're not connected, then the flow of resources doesn't really exist necessarily to the people that it needs to reach.
It's something like 85% use their own funds to be able to get their business started. Automatically sets the limit as to what type of businesses and what type of industries that communities of color get into. And so how do we help change that?
You can't really divorce the challenges that we're facing now from the historic challenges of slavery, Jim Crow, the northern migration. How do we shift the conditions that are marginalizing some folks and over-resourcing other folks in order to reorient it so that everybody has access to sustainable community development? Even though we may struggle with similar issues, every community is different, and we all need to be able to generate our own solutions.
Fundamental to the mission of E-ship communities is targeting historically underrepresented entrepreneurs and business leaders. What neighborhoods are being left out of our city? Who all in community are being a part of talking about these discussions?
In Baltimore, we're really trying to create whole new contexts so that black entrepreneurs can access everything that white entrepreneurs do, but we're doing it in a way that's culturally anchored and really connected to the way black people work together.
The neighborhoods that we're working in don't feel supported. And so how do we help these individuals feel that there's a culture and atmosphere in Kansas City where entrepreneurs feel supported and that there's bringing resources really back to those communities?
I think a lot of those barriers can be addressed through cooperative approaches, but that level of organization has yet to be created.
We're trying out some ideas we think might work, and we're saying, what's the chance someone in another town, city, municipality takes everything we learn and paints a picture of how to tailor it for your specific community?
So building off of that last quote, that's really the intention of our this session here is to share a little bit about the model that has come out of our work in these 4 cities. For those of you who were here earlier, you heard me say, not all ecosystems are the same, and that you don't build them all. That there isn't a recipe or a step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If you've seen one ecosystem, you've seen one ecosystem. So through the work and collaboration with Forward Cities, we were able to sort of find within the 4 cities common. We call them milestones along a pathway. Notice it doesn't say recipe. Notice it doesn't say steps. But these elements were common. Thank you again, Alex. Throughout these processes, and as you're thinking through the story you hear today, think about what elements, similar to the design principle, what elements are you seeing within your own work? I think that there could be a session on each of these 10 milestones. We could do 10 sessions. Philip and I would run out of jokes, though, at that point. So we'll walk through them really fast. This is actually the first time this is the second time we've ever publicly presented this. So you're going to watch, it's going to be a little clunky probably as we figure this out. But do know this is based on a lot of work between Kauffman Foundation and Forward Cities over the last 4 years, and most importantly, the ecosystem builders and the community councils that you saw in the video that participate in this process. So we're going to try a little Vanna White Wheel of Fortune here and walk through these 10 steps with you just briefly to help you understand, and then I guess we're going to give an example. That's the plan? All right. So let's see if my clicker works. You want to start?
Yeah. So we ended the first session today talking about examples of professionalizing ecosystem building and the hiring of an ecosystem builder. One of the first things that we did was, or Forward Cities did, was hire a full-time ecosystem builder in each of the 4 locations to lead the process. So not only were we testing out the process of how to build an effective, inclusive entrepreneurial ecosystem, it's also testing out the efficacy of a full-time ecosystem builder. So that was the first thing that each city did. Qualities of the ecosystem builder: someone who is known very well across the platform of the city and trusted across the city, can speak in every room, represent everyone, and obviously be well liked.
And as we talked about, ecosystem building is not just about the individual parts, but the connections across the ecosystem. And what we realized, and especially looking at some of the communities we were working before we showed up, is the connecting and the cross collaboration was left to chance, to hope, to optimism, and the occasional, hey, we should have a meeting about collaboration. As I said earlier this morning, if you're having a meeting about how you're going to trust and collaborate with each other, just cancel the meeting because that's not going to work. You build trust and collaboration by doing stuff together. But this was the notion of a full-time person whose full-time job was to think about the entire system. The second milestone that we saw, again, a repeated pattern in our processes in all 4 cities, and I'm going to give you a nice slide to summarize all this at the end. I see everyone's taking photos, and please do, is to connect and regularly convene entrepreneurial champions on a community council. So a lot of ecosystem building and economic development activity of the past has been top down by a single institution or organization. How do you build a council, a diverse cross-sector council? If anyone's participated in programs like the MIT REAP program, it's a very similar approach to shared leadership of the effort. So the third milestone, back to you, Philip.
As you go along, collect data. How do you identify, assess, map the assets along the way? and find out what the barriers and opportunities are. So that convening of folks are people that really have to know the DNA of the community, understand its strengths, understand its values, understand the barriers, understand where do you actually want to go and how to work together in order to do that. And the data collection along the way is very, very important, whether that be surveys or how else you might want to do it. There could be other other instruments that folks have used in your community that you may be able to use for it.
Yeah, but I think also that's not a static activity. So you collect data and then you move forward, but you're constantly collecting, assessing, and looking at the health of the ecosystem. Everyone in the organization, in the ecosystem has a different point of view. So recognizing where, not just have data, but where is your data coming from? What is the source of your data? But being able to basically assess the health of the ecosystem through this ongoing collection of data is an important element of this process. Number 4 is now you got all this data, you got all this information, you got all this input, whether it's qualitative or quantitative data. But again, everybody has a different vantage point. So milestone number 4 is sense making. How do you convene a broader set of people in the stakeholder? A broader set of ecosystem stakeholders, and I am including entrepreneurs in that, to explore that data, to make sense of what it means, especially in the lived experience of entrepreneurs, and then to use that to align around priorities. Now, this is all going to make more sense when we give you an example, but we want to run through these steps. Philip, number 5.
So the linking and leveraging is to then try to plan out just like a flight plan. Okay, where are we going to go with this? What do we want to be at the end? And for this initiative, we set it as a 3-year initiative, and that there'd be Kauffman funding to fund it over 3 years. But at the end of 3 years, the goal is for there to be a self-sustaining model, and even that future funds and future funding would be part of that self-sustainability. Kauffman had made mistakes in the past. Philanthropy's done this before. You put money into a city, to an initiative, and then you leave. You just leave without even saying that you'd be exiting. So that's very, very important to do.
And one thing I think is key is this notion of linking and leveraging assets. And what that means is not one organization or individual can build an entrepreneurial ecosystem. Ecosystem building is very much a team sport. Linking and leveraging assets is what is the asset an accelerator might have in the program that could be linked with an asset at the university or in a venture capital fund or in a church or in a Rotary Club? And how can we connect existing assets within the ecosystem to do more to strengthen the ecosystem and then ultimately better support entrepreneurs in their process? Number 6, engagement. This is important. If you remember design principle number 1, keep entrepreneurs front and center, which is engage entrepreneurs and expand the support to include other partners throughout the community. Can't tell you how many meetings I've been in talking about entrepreneurship and there are no entrepreneurs in the room. My general advice in that situation is cancel the meeting or invite entrepreneurs to the next meeting. But you need to engage entrepreneurs in this entire process. All these well-meaning folks helping entrepreneurs without entrepreneurs in the room or people that have been entrepreneurs is oftentimes leads to organizations with good intent to build ecosystems building the wrong things. Number 7, back to you, Philip.
Measuring the impact. We talked about there was designing the impact earlier, designing the plans for the impact earlier. Now you're getting to the being able to measure the impact. And it's interesting. You've got to figure out the periods of time and the intervals in order to measure. So in other words, what are those key performance indicators or mile markers along the highway that you want to use in order to say, are we on the right path, or when do we tack a different way? And that did happen in some of the cities where they realized that where they were going may not have been, they weren't going down the path they wanted to, and then tweaked something. So it's over time. But it's not only measuring the health of the ecosystem, but also the direction of where you're going.
And I think if there's any funders in the room, and we're a funder, is recognizing this stuff takes years, decades, 20 years from today, as Brad Feld says. But you also have to have short-term wins within the 20 years to keep your funders and your supporters with you. And so when you're measuring that impact, what are your short-term goals to know that we're at least on track? As a hint, I will say often use looking at the short-term impact directly on individual entrepreneurs, maybe not the whole ecosystem, but is our intervention helping entrepreneurs move along their journey through the ecosystem? Number 8, this will be familiar if you were listening to the design principles in the earlier session. Widely share the authentic stories of entrepreneurs in the community that supports them. What we found in many communities is people said, oh, there's no entrepreneurs in the east side of Kansas City, which is the historically black or African American neighborhood. And for those of us who live in those general neighborhoods know that to be true, but the perception was that an effort in that part of the community, there were no entrepreneurs when in fact there were. And how do we tell the stories of the already existing entrepreneurs and the people that support them? Storytelling, once again, if you were in our earlier session, gives us a vision to rally around. And a lot of the work that Forward Cities did was to tell an alternative story to the story that was being told about entrepreneurship and the possibility of this place.
And notice that securing resources and financial resources is later in the process. Sometimes you start early in the process, we've got to get money first. And now this project gave some comfort because there was funding that we were putting in. But does that design of everything up front and then be able to go to ask for funding with a full case study and impact data and other things, is we were finding that was helping them, especially after the second year, to prepare for funding post the third year.
And the last, and this is really GECG and shout out, is making sure that as we do this work and as you do your work, that you're sharing what you're learning and exchanging learnings with other communities and ecosystem builders. Ecosystem building is an emerging practice and profession. There's basically zero consensus on really key elements of like how to do it. What even we call it is still an interesting thing we're still debating. But recognizing that sharing with each other is really important as we're all trying to figure this out. So once again, this is the eShip pathways and the milestones that really come out of what we call the eShip communities model. Philip, do you want to sort of give a really quick summary of the, maybe you already did actually, of the 4 communities? So in this time, I'm gonna move pretty quick here, just so we can have some questions. So that's great, sounds good, graphics look pretty, but how does it actually work? I'm gonna give you a very high level overview of what happened in Kansas City with this program, and I'm going to give you the fast version of it, knowing that the goal for us is to get some feedback from you to see what was helpful, and the hope is that we'll be able to publish much more of this in collaboration with Forward Cities. So, eShip Communities, Kansas City. For those of you who keep in mind those 10 milestones, some will be familiar. For those who were here earlier this morning who heard our design principles, some of these are going to show up throughout this story. So, Gabe Munoz, who was the ecosystem builder who led this effort, was hired early in the process. Gabe had been I believe he's a second generation entrepreneur, has a great story about his father sort of inspiring him, and the reason for doing this type of work grew from that. But Gabe's entire purpose and role as the local director of the eShip Communities Kansas City was to coordinate and to activate this council or shared leadership council for this effort that focused on 2 communities in Kansas City. One, if you're familiar with Kansas City, on the east side, which is the historically black community or African American community in Kansas City, and one in another portion of our community called Wyandotte County, which is one of the most diverse counties in the region. So we moved down the pathway to number 2. I make it sound very simple, but Gabe, in coordination with Forward Cities, reached out to build a 13-person council to represent different stakeholders in the ecosystem, looking at diversity in all of its possible ways. The initial effort actually began with institutions, and a quick lesson was don't do that. Actually begin with the grassroots leaders, because getting the grassroots leaders to the table, particularly in communities that have been marginalized, was very difficult. And so Gabe had to really work and use his own relationships and trust with some of the grassroots leaders to initially help get them to the table with university and even institutions like the Kauffman Foundation. This council really led through a model of shared leadership to drive this entire process, Gabe being both the activator of the council and the doer of a lot of the work. The first step was to assess what was going on, and Forward Cities created a series of data analysis activities where we were looking at economic development and community data, the number of entrepreneurs in the community, tax receipts, all those things you think you would manage. They also, the council really felt it was important to hear directly from small businesses and the communities they were looking to serve. So they organized small business tours to learn more about the particularly small businesses in these two communities and what they encountered as they started and grew their business. So the council actually went on multiple tours, door to door, with the grassroots leaders, as well as some of the chamber members. The local bank president came along, and they really had conversations with the entrepreneurs to not just look at the data of how entrepreneurship is working, but ultimately to look at the lived experience of the entrepreneurs. In order to get more data to saturate those stories, the councils also launched a small business development survey and surveyed entrepreneurs. Quickly learned in many marginalized communities, nobody had time to fill out a survey. So members of the council and Gabe went door to door with a paper survey and used the survey as a way to gather that information. They also learned really quickly there was issues of trust there. What are you going to use this information for? A number of those businesses were immigrants who maybe had questions about the government and whether this information was going to the government. But again, Gabe and the council engaging in conversations built trust with the local community and entrepreneurs to help them engage, and actually through those surveys recruited some of the entrepreneurs to be on the council. So after receiving the survey results, the council held several community listening sessions to dig into the results and to hear from the council many perspectives on what the data and the stories in the survey actually meant. The group identified 16 major takeaways, and they synthesized it together through group and facilitated collaborative processes and identified 5 major barriers that in particular faced these two neighborhoods in question. These are probably familiar to some of you, but these barriers included awareness, which is entrepreneurs lack the awareness of existing entrepreneurial support opportunities. Does everyone have that problem? Entrepreneurs don't know there's help for them. Number 2 was around that entrepreneurial events were clustered in areas of the city that were not welcoming to folks who are often left out of these types of conversation. They were too expensive or they were too complex for folks to engage in. The third, which ended up being, I think, a surprising but oh yeah moment for the council, was there was a lack of multilingual programs. Wyandotte County in Kansas City, it's something like 72 languages are spoken, I believe, in the school system, and that became a common theme, which you'll hear a little bit more about. The fourth barrier was that many traditional entrepreneur support organizations did not understand how to work with cultural differences, particularly in Hispanic and immigrant communities, but others as well. And that entrepreneurs generally felt that there was a lack of support and a trust between them and the entrepreneurial support organizations that were out there trying very hard to get entrepreneurs to come in the door, but not being too successful. So again, those 4 barriers were prioritized by a group of people over the course of about 2 or 3 months. Those conversations to get to those barriers built relationships, which helped find who was excited about addressing which of the barriers. So for those of you familiar with lean startup or design thinking, you're going to notice that this is becoming a human-centered process to build an ecosystem. The council then built and began to design collaboratively pilot programs to test possible solutions, or if you're in startup land, you'll know it, MVPs, which they ended up calling something slightly different in this particular situation. But what could we do? What could we test? Our hypothesis about how we might address this barrier in our ecosystem. These pilot programs had some guidelines. Ultimately, the council and its members decided which were the pilot programs. One important key thing here is no one called the Kauffman Foundation and said, what does the Kauffman Foundation want to fund? We said, listen to the entrepreneurs and the community council to design programs that support entrepreneurs led by the people closest on the ground, who are the entrepreneurs or the people directly supporting them, and do it in a cultural context that you understand, not what we think as an institution and a funder. So these pilot guidelines were basically MVPs, if anyone, again, in startup land. For reasons I'll skip for now, they called them minimum viable solutions, meaning we're not going to solve the problem for everybody, but we're going to test the hypothesis to address the barrier. Instead of launching full programs, it was simply let's test and validate. So again, the community council, which had now grown to something like 35 members, ultimately worked together, entrepreneurial support organizations, entrepreneurs, community leaders, and civic leaders, to design these programs. One of the working groups actually came up with this idea of providing more diversity and cultural competency training for mentors in the ecosystem and to recruit more diverse mentors. So that was project minimum viable solution number 1. Again, we're addressing language and cultural barriers with that one. And working group number 2 addressed the issue that many of the ESOs, entrepreneurial support organizations, didn't go into these neighborhoods, and they needed a shop and a place that they could land within the community. So through those 2 initiatives, they began those pilots engaged with the actual community of entrepreneurs. They had multiple ESOs collaborate on an event to share existing ESO services, about 7 of them, from across Kansas City came to one central community space in a extremely diverse neighborhood. The first event was held, and there were interpreters who spoke Spanish, Nepali, and Burmese, and more than half of the attendees needed language assistance, and more than 3/4 of the attendees were people of color. All in approximately, I'd put it this way. The goal of the minimum viable solution was that 25 people would show up. There was 120 people. They filled up the parking. Folks who had never seen before entrepreneurs came, and again, had the translation and the language interpretation. Through that engagement, Gabe also went out into the community to engage entrepreneurs one-on-one, and actually created office hours at the library, the local library. And over 20 entrepreneurs showed up in the first couple office hours. They didn't open an office. They didn't launch a new organization. They simply did office hours at the library. Those programs continued to grow, and over time, these minimal viable solutions showed their impact. Again, very simple: office hours at the library and a couple events. 63 entrepreneurs showed up. I think you can see all this. Some of the entrepreneurs who they had never met, the SOs had never met, showed up 4+ times. At about this moment in the program, and the plan was going well, COVID actually hit, and there was a slight pivot to helping entrepreneurs specifically apply for COVID relief money. Ultimately, through that program, and I'm skipping a bunch here, they helped almost 28 small businesses in that community who initially met Gabe through engagement at the library and Zoom to apply for grant programs. Because these were minimum viable solutions, they were able to quickly pivot the program to address the current moment with the COVID, as we all dealt with, the COVID surprise of the spring of 2020. Ultimately, what was identified through this program is that language barriers and access were a significant problem in helping some of these entrepreneurs connect with already existing ESOs, and then the geography problem of the ESOs were in other parts of the community. Ultimately, to keep this presentation short, the council found validation of those ideas and ultimately decided to open a shared ESO space in the community called the Toolbox that provided multilingual support, and not only provided it in culturally competent ways, but then used that connection to route entrepreneurs to other ESOs in the community and to give the ESOs the space to come into the community, ultimately to support entrepreneurs. So again, I've gone through this quite quickly, but to recognize that this is basically the lean ecosystem approach. Rather than deciding at the beginning what the solution was to engage the community in a shared and collaborative process, driven not just with data, but insight from entrepreneurs, to then test and validate small solutions. All of those small solutions required collaborations of at least 2 entrepreneurial support organizations. So the act of actually going through this human-centered design process built collaboration and trust across the ecosystem. So this process went on through 4 different communities. We just gave you the really fast version of the Kansas City one, but you can see how each of these different councils approached, identified barriers within their community, and then ultimately turned those MVPs, or those minimum viable solutions, into more permanent solutions within their community. Because this thing is now blinking at me, I'm going to wrap this up by just showing you a video to give us a sense of where Gabe, who ultimately was promoted from being the ecosystem builder to being both the ecosystem builder and the executive director of the Toolbox.
There's one thing I can't remember if you said is the folks that were on these coalitions had been in the same city doing some of the same work for some of them decades, but had never been in the same room before working together. And so that fragmentation that can happen in communities is everyone's passionate through do-gooding, whatever it is that people want to do the right thing and are trying to do the right thing. And for some reason, they're silos. For some reason, they're not working together. whatever the reason, we tried to, and this proved out, that those folks can come together and work on something for a united purpose. But I mentioned earlier today the social innovation part. Part of that is socially innovating. It's how do people work differently socially in order to behave differently and in order to make different decisions, which then can change systems.
So I'll just show a quick video to wrap this up, and then Alex, I promise we'll wrap up, which is to give you a sense of where Gabe is at now and where the toolbox is at now, and recognizing that the toolbox really ultimately is a geographic location in a community that hadn't recognized how many entrepreneurs there were, that really acts and engages with those entrepreneurs in culturally competent ways, and then is sort of the on-ramp to the larger ecosystem within Kansas City. So let's watch this video, and then I think we'll hang out in the hallway if you have other things you want to talk to us about. Unfortunately, with time, we're not going to have a ton of time to do questions. So Alex, I don't know if it's possible to play this video, and if not, we can wrap it up. Let's see what happens. Oh, that one's not working. Okay. All right. We'll go from. So let's just go to the last set of slides here. That one right there. Exactly. And I'll just finish up here. Interesting. Okay. Well, again, thank you. This program is called eShip Communities. We're very excited to help engage with you to talk more about some of these models and how they might work or not work, or what feedback you have in your community. I would highly encourage you to engage not just us, but Forward Cities if you're interested in talking more about it. Get your cameras out. I got 2 slides for you, which is here's your 10 milestones. And again, the question is, are you thinking about each of these milestones within, again, not necessarily in this order, within your efforts? And then we also talked about the 7 design principles in session number 1. If you are interested more around these design principles, Kauffman.org/playbook. These are very thoroughly explained there. And then our hope is to publish more on the eShip Communities as we figure out how to roll this out and share it with the community. But you're a very early audience, so thank you so much for your patience and time with us. Any final words, Philip?
I actually don't know if there's another session starting, so it's the last one, so I don't think there's anyone trying to come in the room. If you want to wrap it, any questions? Or do we need to get out? Oh, use the mic. So we can do the question, and I can actually mic run like I did before, earlier today. Got 2 in the front.
And if you need to go somewhere, it is not awkward if you get up right now and go somewhere.
Oh, yeah, I mean, totally. I'll take 2 mics out. So
You have some questions, just shout them out right here. You had one right up front. We'll do a quick lightning round.
there you go.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you so much. I think this is the most essential. I'm from Iraq, and I run an incubator and co-working space. And I think this is one of the most important things that we can replicate in the country. We are working in a lot of communities and grassroots all across other cities and other towns in the country, and building ecosystems is essential not only for the economy but for the stability and the security of the country itself. I have one question. Regarding when you talked about sustainability, you didn't talk about how you're gonna financially sustain this approach.
Yep. That's a great question.
How are you gonna the people, the ecosystem builders, the people who are gonna work, they're gonna do a full-time job, so they need to be paid. So how does that work out?
So I think we had mixed results in this, but the insight we got was when the funders were on the council from the beginning and were involved in the designing of the MVSs, and then actually understood why the MVSs existed, it was much more helpful at the end when the MVS needed $100,000 or $200,000 for the local chamber to be, oh, well, we were on that council, we helped build it, and you didn't call us at the end, you engaged us from the beginning. Also, Kauffman Foundation supported 2 of the initiatives in Kansas City separate from this because we watched the whole process and recognize that the entrepreneurs were really leading the solutions. And if you'd asked Philip and I mean, we're smart people, but if you'd said, like, what's the number 1 barrier? I actually wouldn't have said language. I would have said, like, something else. But it helped us as an institution to go, no, we not only see the data that language is an issue, we heard it And one of our staff members actually participated on the council as well in those conversations. So again, engaging the funders or the organizations that do fund. And of the 4 communities, 2 of them have received follow-on funding for their MVSs since with local funders since we got launched. And then 2 of them are still working sort of through that.
Thank you so much. Just one follow-up question. The funders, do they fund like as philanthropy, or do they are investing in the ecosystems? How does that work?
Well, government, philanthropy, and then actually a university who was doing ecosystem building but realized that they could just fund someone else to do some of that work.
Thank you so much.
Ali Al-Bawi from Iraq as well. I'll also just want to ask about, like, since you have implemented this project in 4 cities, what was the exit strategy that you took so you made sure that this will be sustainable later on? And how long was it, like, the program you implemented?
You want to take that? Want me to take it?
You start.
I got it. Okay. I think for the Kauffman Foundation, the biggest thing is we were very upfront that this is a 3-year program, and that we intentionally are not funding the follow-on, but we're de-risking the process for them to try it out. The reality was, if it didn't work, they got the chance to try it, and it didn't cost anybody locally. What we found in two of the communities, particularly the councils, our funding finished, and they're like, no, but we want to keep meeting. And they didn't actually need a ton of funding except for that ecosystem builder because the relationships had already formed. Our intention, because we were, except for the Kansas City one, we don't have locations in those communities. We were very upfront, which I don't know if that...
I just think it was the clarity at the beginning. Like I said before, we had done community-based efforts in Albuquerque and other cities in the past, and the mistake that we made was not being very honest and clear at the beginning that, no, we really mean that's just the only funding we're going to do. So we left the people had an expectation, well, they're going to hang around. Then we exit, and then they're like, well, we were doing so many things, and you left us cold. So it's being very intentional up front, and then also make that, I think that became more important for them to have a funder mindset person or persons in the coalition at the beginning, so that, to Andy's point, it's saleable to the mayor's office or what have you. Oops, I guess that means we're done.
Wrapped up. Stop talking. The last thing I would say is we were also in the communities said, if this is not valuable to you to have an ecosystem builder and a cross-cultural council, this is up for you to decide if this is the right model for your community. And I think in one of the communities, it was like, this is just too complicated and the politics is too hard. We're just going to let the city do it. Right. And that's actually a learning, right? Which is a community-driven collaborative council actually is not the model that's going to work in this community. Though they did some really great things and some of them continued on. They were really like, hey, mayor's office, could you keep doing this type of work? Okay, I think we're getting kicked out.
You got all the best shots of the speakers. You have the microphone all the time. Anyway, thanks everyone.
Here's what we'll do. We'll go out in the hallway. I know, because I actually now I think about the closing plenaries now, so we probably need to go.
Act like I'm talking, so I get a shot. No, go ahead.
Can I do? I was just interested in, probably don't know this, I'm Tara from Australia, State Library Victoria. Interested in anyone else had actually followed your playbook from a philanthropy sector. Have they seen you and thought, you're awesome, I want to do this, and come to you and said, how do you do this?
What we started is called the Entrepreneur Funders Network, where there are now over 30 plus and more than that philanthropic organizations in an association type of model that we help seed. And so they are now, we've done presentations to them on this, and they're taking some of the best practices and see how they can apply in philanthropies actually across the nation. And we're learning from them too.
All right. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Alex.